Good morning, everyone. So I'm waiting for my daughter to finish her community college class, and I thought I would do a quick video giving you my reasons for being a government school monopoly abolitionist. I put it that way because I do hold out the possibility that localities could decide to offer a public option, could vote on it, could voluntarily fund it, etc. And that would be fine. I mean, I certainly wouldn't oppose that because that's your right to do, right? I think as long as it's optional, it's a public option that people have voted to participate in, as long as it's something they could opt out of, or I'd rather they be able to opt into it and then contribute via their taxes or, some payment to it, even collecting donations, things like that. I have no problem with that. I would consider that sort of like, maybe the post office or something. Public options can be democratically decided. What I oppose is the government monopoly on education, and I think it needs to be abolished. Here are my reasons why, as quickly as I can give it to you. Number one, currently it's compulsory. The compulsory nature of public education in America, I believe, is un-American and unconstitutional. I understand it has passed muster many, many times in the courts, so technically it's constitutional if we're looking at case law. I just personally don't think it is. I don't think in the United States of America that the government, in particular the federal government, should be compelling the states to provide a public education to all people who are in the state. I don't think so. That creates the unfunded mandate that justifies the existence of the Department of Education, which then justifies, coerced tax collection for the purposes of educating people in a state where you don't live, and so on and so on. It actually just pulls more money out of the economy and empowers the federal government more than the states insofar as the education of their citizens locally, would be. I don't think every region or every state has the same needs as far as what the kids need to learn. I think there are core subjects. I believe in classical education, but I don't think that the federal government knows what's best for everybody. And I just think the coercive and compulsory nature of it is inherently wrong. And it creates all kinds of power for the government to punish people, punish parents, oversee what parents are doing, even in their own homes. And it sort of opens the door to a kind of supervision of parenting that I think, again, is inherently un-American. Reason number two, it is, by definition, indoctrination. When the government runs it and the government chooses what must be taught, the government is going to teach what's in the government's interest, what supports the existing power structure or party that's in power. That's common sense. It's a conflict of interest. People in power are going to want to retain power. Our founders knew this. There's no check and balance in place to prevent that from happening. Before there was a federal Department of Education, it was a little bit better. The state boards of ed controlled it. All they were told by the federal government is you must provide education, but at least at the state level, they would decide what the standards would be and what would be taught. That doesn't mean they weren't still indoctrinating kids. We had states in this country that were still teaching the victimized South story up until the 80s. We still had people teaching Bible in the classroom that had to be, reminded of the First Amendment. But it's still a better thing than having a mandatory equity policy per the Obama administration, or, any of the other mandatory policies that simply result in the selection of curricula and standards that meet the federal policy, because the giant pot of money from the federal government is a whole lot bigger and schools have become a whole lot more dependent on it than they ever would have been if it didn't exist. So it just creates more corruption and more indoctrination. It also facilitates the indoctrination of our school teachers from the top, from the university level, because these are state universities that are also looking for federal money, and they're also given standards to get the money from the federal government. So you see how that works? They just become centers for indoctrination. That too is inherently wrong. We should not have to make a choice between ideas going into our children's heads that are against us and for our rulers. That's just not American. we shouldn't have to make that choice. And increasingly, it's not even a choice. You have to jump through hoops of fire to educate your own. Okay? So, reason number 3, there are no parental rights. This really ought to be reason number 1. If I were counting backwards, this would be my number 1 reason. But based on what I just told you about how it's compulsory and you, the parent, can get punished if you don't go along and you don't provide some other solution. And by the way, jump through these hoops of fire to provide the solution. Oh, and we've already collected your tax money, so you can't afford another solution. So guess what? You're kind of our captive. All right. And then reason number 2, you're our captive and your child is our captive to the ideas we think your child should know. Not the ideas from your home, not the values from your home, not all the reasons you became a parent in the first place, but what we think and what we want for your child. So, of course, that necessitates the elimination of your rights as a parent, doesn't it? If you had more rights, if you had the parental right to say, absolutely not, I don't want my child learning this about our faith or this about our country or this about sexuality and their gender. If you had the right to say, absolutely not, I'm opting my kid out of that class, or I'm opting my kid out of that lesson, or, we, the parents collected here at this board meeting or whatever it is, say absolutely not. If you were able to do that, they couldn't do what they want to do. That is why they had to eliminate your right at the doorstep. And the case law says that. You can go watch my longer video. It explains how the case law currently says that your rights stop at the schoolhouse door. Your child's don't, but your 6 and 7-year-old doesn't know how to exercise his or her right to defend their own mind. That's asking a bit much, isn't it? Okay, so you don't have rights. And now it's compulsory and they're indoctrinating. And if you don't like it, what's going to happen? Well, we've just seen with Attorney General Merrick Garland's letter in response to what we now know was not a unanimously agreed upon letter from the National School Board Association asking them to call parents domestic terrorists. We have the self-involved conflict of interest, burdened AG whose son-in-law is part of Panorama Ed, surveying your kids, data mining your kids, looking to medicate your kids so they pull farther away from you and closer to Big Daddy government. We have them calling you domestic terrorists simply for pushing back because, as I said, you don't have rights. So those are my 3 reasons, guys. It's compulsory. Did you ever stop and think about how messed up that is, that your children are like little indentured servants to the government? It is indoctrinating. Is that American? What happened to freedom of speech and diversity of thought? And finally, you, the parent, have no rights once you cross the threshold. If you're even allowed to, your child will. They have to. Remember, it's compulsory. So if those 3 reasons are not enough for you to understand why I think it is our moral obligation to work for the abolition of this system of servitude to the state, I don't know how better to explain it to you. But that's the shortened version. I hope it helps. If you like this video or find it informative, please consider liking it, sharing it, subscribing to the channel, commenting, joining my locals. The reason we learned at locals.com, we can talk about these things up close, personal, where you'll never be censored. Right there in Locals or in one of my 2 Zoom calls a week. I hope you all have a great day.